Welcome to Speak with Eve. I'm your host, Eurydice. Today's guest is my dear friend Richard Verity, who I met as a poet at the University of Colorado. Then he became a management consultant for 25 years to big oil conglomerates, and suddenly turned around and founded a pretty amazing charity in Lebanon, a school, a refugee school. And that's what today we're going to find out more about. So welcome to the show, Richard.
Thank you very much, Eurydice.
I have followed with great interest your philanthropic career, your service, humanitarian service. This fall, you reached a time of crisis. Sometime in September, there was the bombing of Lebanon because of the Gaza war. The school was at risk. So that's the impetus for having you on our show today. I'd love to have my listeners hear about Alsama, the school, how you got involved, how it began, where it has been going, and then focus a little on what happened during the war, which seems to be over for now.
Let me tell the personal story to start with, then describe Alsama, and then describe the death of Alsama beneath the bombs and the rebirth of it that happened shortly afterwards. The personal story. So 2018, my wife and I had a synchronized midlife crisis. We both felt highly dissatisfied with our lives. She was a writer. She had published 5 books. She ran her own publishing company. She lived a happy existence in North London. I was a management consultant, going from airport to headquarters and headquarters back to airports. And there was something obviously missing. And what was missing was any kind of visible social impact. I got an opportunity to become a temporary CEO of an NGO in Lebanon serving Syrian refugees. And for a year I did that. And Eurydice, it was not a giant success for 2 reasons. The first reason was that I was perhaps not such a good CEO after all. I was, in fact, a typical management consultant, someone who saw very quickly the problems of an organization and then very naively tried to solve them all at once. And that, I think I lost my leadership team halfway along the journey. Halfway through that year, I too came to a conclusion that the NGO world was not for me, that the kind of norms that I'd come to expect, professionalism, meetings starting on time, deliverables, real clarity about what the organization was there to do, none of those things existed in the NGO world. And at the end of that 12 months, I think everyone breathed a sigh of relief that we were leaving. Meike and I on one hand, the organization on the other. And what we hadn't expected was that we would receive, practically on our last day in Lebanon, a delegation of 40 children who tried to insist that we stay. These were children that I had been teaching cricket to. So cricket is a strange thing to teach in an Arabic context, in a refugee context in the Middle East. I mean, it's an unknown sport, but it was the only thing that I could teach that didn't require Arabic, and I could speak at that stage no Arabic at all. They learned cricket very quickly. They fell in love with it shortly afterwards, and they wanted the cricket to continue. They also wanted Meike to continue because she, unlike me, could speak Arabic and was running empowerment classes for the girls. Empowerment classes being essentially mentoring classes that try to ensure that the children don't go into early marriage at the age of 12.
So in 2018, girls still considered it pretty normative to be married at 12 to grown-up men.
Oh, Eurydice, yes. There are about, 1.5 million of them in Lebanon, 600,000 children of school age. About 50% of them have never gone to any school at all,
Wow.
illiterate, numerate.
Wow.
The rate of early marriage, at the age of 15, for girls is in excess of 40%.
Oh my.
The percentage of children that finish secondary school is less than 3%. So less than 3% probably get into a secondary school in the first instance. You've really got to go a long way to find a group of children with bleaker life prospects than Syrian refugees in Lebanon or in Syria or in Jordan or arguably in Turkey too.
I'm sorry, this is parenthetically, it is unimaginable. So before they became refugees, the statistics were similar. The girls were not being educated and they were being married by the age of 12.
I'm not sure I can say that with certainty, but this is a society in which illiteracy and innumeracy is widespread. So if I look at the children, the parents of Alsama children, I see illiterate, innumerate parents. So I can only imagine that this is a society that has, for a long period of time, been illiterate, innumerate, living in villages around Syria, with early marriage being extremely common, poor levels of education, and extreme poverty.
And now with the new government in Lebanon inviting them back, in Syria, that's what I meant, inviting them back, are they interested in returning?
They might be. They're very excited.
They are.
The fall of Assad is simply good news to any right-thinking person. I mean, there's very little to be said in favour of that regime. Some of our children during the bombing did go back to Syria, and these are children that live in desperate poverty and in slums, but they were shocked by what they found in Syria. So Syria is a wasteland. It has no water. It doesn't have very much food. It certainly has no schools. It's a grim place to live, and it has, on top of that, it's extremely dangerous. So our children, particularly those that went back to Raqqa, found themselves having to avoid marauding groups of ISIS that still are at large, living out in the desert, coming in. And you have 3 different air forces as we speak today, bombing Syria. So Lebanon is, compared with that, relatively safe.
Who's bombing Syria right now? Israelis.
Bombing Syria, destroy all the remnants of the Syrian army's infrastructure. The Americans are bombing in order to try and ensure that ISIS does not fill any kind of power vacuums. Russia bombs Syria on a regular basis. I can't speak for Turkey, but it certainly has done. I don't know.
The Greeks, the Orthodox Christians, and the Kurds report that they are being bombed by Turkish aircraft as well. Unimaginable that as we speak here, this is happening.
An dangerous place, Syria, and we can only hope that Alani will have a future that is less radical or liberal than his past.
Amen. We can hope that on very little evidence. And to think that Syria, along with Iraq, the birthplace of most of civilization, certainly of Western civilization, is Judeo-Christians. And this is what's happening. It's unimaginable. And so much treasure, so much cultural treasure has been kept there safely for so long and now is at risk.
You're so right. No, Damascus is apparently the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. Both Lebanon and Syria is multi-ethnic, certainly multicultural. 3 or 4 different types of Islam, 3 or 4 different types of Christian.
And then the Druze, I don't know if they have Yazidis, there are a lot of also ancient, semi-pagan, religious, tiny minorities around.
Well, exactly. You could imagine both Syria and Lebanon being fantastic cultural equilibrium with different languages. I mean, sort of Netherlands of the Middle East, if you like. Or you can also imagine it being chaotic, ungovernable, as it has been.
Well, when you and I were in college, right before we met, I had friends as an undergrad who were Lebanese, talked about Lebanon as a cosmopolitan, semi-European place. We had a lot in common. I traveled there to visit their parents, then went to Morocco. So it was a totally different sense of those countries than we have of them now.
Indeed.
Yeah. Back to Richard Verity, teaching Egypt. Even after he's done with the NGO.
Picking up the story from where I left off, Meike stayed in Beirut. I went back to my management consulting, but did so from the Riyadh office, not the London office. And so things would have remained. But what became clear was that our children had sensed weakness. They knew that they could get more from us if they asked. And so they started to ask. They wanted to know if they could taught Arabic because they couldn't read or write their own names.
Wow.
They wanted to be able to speak English. They wanted to be able to manage their families' budgets.
Wow.
And so fast forward to January 2020, we set up an organization called the Alsama Project. Mm-hmm. Alsama means sky in Arabic. Mm-hmm. And the idea is to create new horizons for refugee teenagers. And so in some senses, it's very easy to understand what we do. We set up schools inside refugee camps, secondary schools, schools. We educate teenagers between the ages of 12 and 18. What makes Alsama remarkable, almost unique? Well, first and foremost, there's no one else doing that. There are, to the best of my knowledge, almost no secondary school opportunities for Syrian refugees. The children can't get into the Lebanese state secondary schools, and they obviously can't afford the private ones.
Why can't they get into the state schools? Are they not allowed to get into the state secondary schools because they are refugees?
The vast majority of them are not just refugees, but illegal refugees. Without wanting to be too severe on Lebanon, which has taken in more refugees per capita than almost any other country in the world, they are not welcoming to Syrian refugees. Syria itself as a country has had a difficult relationship with Lebanon over a long period of time. Lebanon has had its problems with states growing up within the state, and it does its very best to create a hostile environment for Syrian refugees and send them back when it can.
I see.
So no surprise that it's very hard for a Syrian refugee student to get into a secondary school or indeed any school. So we are the only game in town when it comes to secondary education.
Amazing.
We've created something that is very much unlike an NGO. In fact, it's much more like a tech startup without the tech. It means firstly that we're very concerned with data. We measure everything. We measure the attendance of the children, which is extraordinarily high, 97%. We measure the achievements of the children, what the parents think about us. We measure what the students think about us. We have very good financial systems so we can see where the money is being spent and whether it's being spent wisely.
How many students are you educating at any given time?
So we're educating 880 students.
Wow.
That's in 4 different schools, each school 120, which is the size of the population that one can fit into one of these tenement buildings in Shatila or in Bourj al-Barajneh. The other thing that makes us remarkable is that we are trying to create not just a limited education or a holding pen for students to keep them off the streets. We're trying to create a world-class education in these schools. Well, that means that we try to make these children literate and numerate in 6 months at extraordinary speed.
Intensive, highly intensive.
Highly intensive. We give our children practically no holiday. They term times 44 weeks a year. And after 6 months, they are literate and numerate with a question of what would happen, what will they be after 6 years?
Yeah.
After 6 years, they should be ready for university.
It's amazing.
Well, imagine, we're doing in 6 years what the rest of the world's education systems do in 12.
Not always successfully, with much bigger budgets.
With much bigger budgets. Costs for a year of private education in an Alsama school, it costs $900. Paid for clearly not by the children themselves,
donations.
But by donations. That's our claim to fame, that we are running secondary schools in places where no INGO wants to go. These are these kind of very volatile, very dangerous refugee camps. We're doing so in a way that produces measurable outcomes that would be surprising for a well-established education system and quite unique for refugee schools.
And for the record, it's not about each child only. That child then passes on this transformation, personal transformation, and this new knowledge to their siblings, to their parents, to their grandparents. So it echoes. I think that what's even more valuable is how much each one of these educated, enlightened, re-enlightened citizens of the world can also echo this to everyone around them.
So true. And this is not a region that has had extraordinary inspirational leaders. What we would love is for and Kadria, the chief of operations, asks the children that come into the school, so why are you here? What is your objective? And to start with, these are children completely without dreams or aspirations, but they acquire them quite quickly. And one of the things that we are hoping these children will do is rebuild Syria. This is the generation that is going to create a better Syria and hopefully a better Middle East than the one that preceded them. But Eurydice, I'll say one more thing about why this formula for education works, because in truth, one can think of a dozen different reasons why it shouldn't. The teachers are paid so little, the children are under great pressure to leave school early, to go into marriage or pick up plastic from the street.
Make some money.
So make some money. Why is this work? I'd love to say, well, it's the brilliant management, it's the institutionalization of the schools, it's our great policies, it's our teacher training, it's our bespoke curriculum, which we've created our own curriculum that clearly works. If I'm really honest, it's none of those things. The reason these schools work is because they are the most benign learning environments I've ever come across, and that is because of the children. These are children that have completely astonished us. They have grown up, many of them under ISIS, so if they've come from northern Syria and from Raqqa, that's what they've known first. They've then seen war. They now live in a slum in Shatila with no prospects. Their parents aren't allowed to work. They're not allowed to work officially. They are desperately, desperately poor. You would have thought they are traumatized, and they might indeed, many of them are, and that's why we have psychologists in each of the schools, so that part of them can be dealt with. But what they also are children with an extraordinary ability to self-heal, an extraordinary work ethic. They see school as an absolute privilege. It's very hard for them to be persuaded to leave school at the end of the school day rather than to come to school at the beginning of the school day. There is absolutely no shortage of talent in a refugee camp. There is just a shortage of opportunity. We can teach these children anything. If I can teach them cricket, then they can certainly learn Arabic and maths and English and music, whatever we want to teach them, chess, debating. They pick it up and they run with it. The teachers have to struggle to keep up with them rather than the other way around.
How many teachers do you have for a student body of 880?
It's about 20 students, 20 teachers per school. So 4 schools, 80 teachers. What we're also doing is beginning to, this is a sort of Ponzi scheme, it requires ongoing Alsama, but we are beginning to employ our own students, one way of keeping them in education. But it's also one way of assuring the quality of the teaching provision, because some of the students are now extremely capable of teaching themselves, particularly, let's be clear, when it comes to cricket.
Yeah.
The student cricket coaches are both better cricketers and better coaches.
And do you have visiting teachers who come on a volunteer basis to teach for a few months?
So we do. We now have an internship program in which we recruit from the best universities in Britain and America, in particular, Ivy League, Oxford, Cambridge. We pay our interns something like $500 a month, so you don't come to Alsama for wealth, but we give them an extraordinary experience. Yeah, they work in a refugee camp, they meet the children, they're part of this very exciting organization. We give them huge amounts of autonomy. They are responsible for much of the innovation. They're responsible for all of our policy creation, the writing of proposals, and they also run projects of their own. They get in front of the students, and the students benefit. Some have taught philosophy, some have taught chess, some have taught public speaking, and so it goes.
That's wonderful. All kids and all teenagers have this hunger for learning, but sometimes when you feel most desperate, which is the childhood equivalent of hitting rock bottom, when you are raised in rock bottom, that's when you progress and you evolve the fastest, because you're motivated to focus. And so that hunger, which I think we all have innately, doesn't leave you. There are no distractions. This is all you want. It's very wise, because this is the time in a person's life when you can change their destiny between 12 and 18. That's brilliant. When I came to America, I was barely 15. I had no idea that I would become another person, but it was almost like entering another planet from my little Greek island, which was so conservative, going to LA, high school in LA. Everything was different. Just that alone, even without all the knowledge that the West so freely and generously gave me. That alone, the understanding that there are other cultures, that it's all kind of statistics and it's kind of where you happen to be born. It's not the only way, it's not the only law. That understanding alone is so transformative for a person, because you're no longer bound by the monopoly of the culture that you just happen to be born into. You understand that there are alternative versions. So you can respect your own, but you respect it differently from how it was when you thought that's the way that everyone alive exists. That's what everyone does. There is no other option. So I think the fact that you go to them and you tell them, you show them, more than tell them, you show them that there are many different versions of the truth, that there are some basic moral laws that govern us, whoever we may be, but that otherwise there are many versions of the truth. Scientific versions, Western versions, Southern versions, Northern versions. I think that alone changes them forever, liberates them and expands them, their lives. So it's something that you're doing now that changes their lives, hundreds and hundreds of human lives forever. Pretty magnificent.
You're so right on 2 points. I mean, firstly, that adolescence is a remarkable time in any person's life. If you want to change someone, get them then, just at that moment, because they are transforming themselves regardless.
Right.
And if you can teach them at that moment new things, they will learn very quickly and they will reshape themselves according to what they've learned. Teenagers are extraordinarily exciting to work with. And then the second point, I also think you're right, that Alsama is extremely respectful of their culture. I mean, we teach Arabic, we take Eid off, we are guests inside these refugee camps, and if we were anything but respectful, we wouldn't have a license to operate. That said, I think that if you are a Syrian refugee, you feel for much of the time extraordinarily neglected by the world, and having some kind of international connection, connecting up with the interns that come from Britain, America, or playing cricket, which is an international sport that allows them to connect up with people in India, with Australia, with New Zealand, England, West Indies. This is all extremely important to them. It does indeed create a new horizon for them. And they love that too. They're ready for that.
I think that's the best part about multiculturalism, the understanding that there are multiple cultures and they're all somehow equally valid, ancient, and not mutually exclusive. That alone, if we could all kind of internalize that, is the beginning of wisdom, because you're no longer stuck. You're free to think critically, to go back to first principles, to use your judgment about all kinds of matters that otherwise our ancestors, who were born in very, very static, isolated communities, had no idea that they could have a say in. They just automatically followed the herd. So that's how we went through many centuries of more or less repetition before the Enlightenment. That's actually the meaning of the Enlightenment. So I want our listeners to hear about the effects of the war. So what happened at the end of September when the bombing began, and you yourself caught in the middle of it.
So this was the death of Alsama, or we thought at the time it was. After October the 7th, there was warfare along the southern border between Lebanon and Israel, but it was constrained. It was almost formulaic. One side sent a missile over, the other side responded with a missile, and there were rules that were maintained. That all changed dramatically in September when Israel decided that it would take out Hezbollah, which is an organization that supported Assad and therefore had no particular affiliation with Syrian refugees, it must be said, who were fleeing Assad. In September, we found ourselves first with exploding pagers, then exploding walkie-talkies, and then finally drones hanging over Beirut, bombs beginning to fall in different parts of Beirut and in other parts of Lebanon as well. Bourj al-Barajneh and Shatila are in southern Beirut, which is where the bombs were falling. I mean, very close, particularly Bourj al-Barajneh, was very close to Dahya, which is a Shia area and which was particularly targeted by the drone strikes. So a number of things happened round about September the 28th. I mean, the first was that the Lebanese government required both Shatila and Bourj al-Barajneh to be evacuated because those two camps were felt to be too dangerous. The second was that many of our children left Beirut altogether. Some went back to Syria, some slept rough, some went to other towns like Tripoli up the coast. And the third thing that happened was that the embassy, my daughter, myself, put Meike under great pressure, Meike being the CEO of Alsama and my wife, to leave. Yeah, I mean, what was the point of putting your life in danger when it wasn't clear that Alsama had anything useful to do in the middle of a war? And so for a day or two, Meike contemplated departure. We contemplated, closing down Alsama because it had no one to teach and nowhere to teach. To Meike's great credit, she decided that that would not happen. So she decided to stay, brave the bombs. We decided that we would, and this was after just a couple of days, that we would open all 4 schools in one form or another. So we issued SIM cards to the students that couldn't get into the school, particularly those in Bourj al-Barajneh, which was too close to Dahia for comfort, so that we could rather unsatisfactorily, but still better than nothing, teach children over WhatsApp. We opened up the 2 Shatila schools, having registered them with the United Nations. Apparently, the IDF looks at the United Nations database before it launches its missiles. So I'm not sure how comfortable we were taking a bet on the IDF not launching a missile, because it has also in its past destroyed schools and hospitals. But
in Gaza,
in Gaza, yeah. But we made ourselves believe that these schools were safer perhaps than places where the children and the parents were living.
Right.
In October, we were the only 4 schools in the entire country that will continue to operate.
Oh, that's beautiful. Congratulations.
No, it was heroic. And I would ring up Meike every morning and say, how was it? And she said, well, the bombs were a little closer today, but we're all okay. And so it went.
Were there any alarms ringing, or you just looked up and, was there a system of alerting people to take cover?
But this wasn't true all the time. So there was, if Israel was going after a building, then we knew in advance, were told in advance.
By IDF?
Not by them directly, but we're told to evacuate certain places. For example, we were told to evacuate the Bourj al-Barajneh schools slightly late in the day, but we already had done so by that time, but before a day and a night of bombing of Dahia. So the system does work. However, it doesn't work 100% of the time. So there have also been moments where buildings have been destroyed and people killed. And perhaps that's the point. They were trying to get at a particular person and didn't want to issue a warning. And then you're just in the hands of God. So month of October, we continued to operate. There was a slight, I imagine the audience for this podcast is largely American. So let me mention my American moment, which was a moment of great pride when we won.
Yes, the Library of Congress.
We won the Library of Congress Literacy Award, which is, if you want to know what's great about America, well, it is the home of philanthropy. There's no other library of any other nation that issues philanthropic prizes as the Library of Congress does. This was a prize that every NGO doing education in the world was eligible for, and we won it. And we felt very proud of ourselves. We made a speech. We went there, and the warmth of the welcome from the audience, not just for us, but for all the NGOs, was beautifully American and made me feel nostalgic for Eurydice, your time, my time in Colorado. Where I thought America was the greatest country on earth, and there's still
I still kind of do.
I still kind of do myself. But there we were in the Library of Congress, and through the window on the other side was not the Library of Congress, but Congress, voting through bills that essentially were funding the drone strikes that children were trying to avoid. And that's America too.
We keep voting against that, America, but somehow, whichever way we vote, they stay in power.
Well, and let me not say that the situation in the Middle East lends itself to easy solutions, but the ironies of being celebrated in the Library of Congress while the Congress itself was doing things that were putting our children at risk was an irony that everyone was aware of, in the room and us up on stage. So, I mean, fast forward to the present, and indeed looking forward to the future.
Yeah, where does Alsama go next?
We are now fully operational. The bombs have stopped. Assad has fallen. We're thinking how wonderful it would be to start creating Alsama schools in Syria, which have no school system at all to speak of. I mean, Alsama is made for situations where the government has failed, wars have happened or could happen, where no INGO really would like to go. That's where we operate. I mean, and we can do wonders in those kinds of situations. So Syria fits the bill perfectly. So does Gaza.
So does Gaza. So does Iraq. So does Afghanistan, if one could creep in somehow, but plenty of...
You have to be given some kind of license to operate, even if it's a passive one. So I'm not sure how well we'd do in Afghanistan. And indeed, but in these other places you just mentioned, those would be perfect for us. In order to proceed, though, we have to slowly and steadily raise the money that equals a school. A school costs about $200,000. Whenever we raise that amount, then we open another school. I mean, our great achievement up till now is that, from nothing. We have managed to create 4 schools and have this stable and loyal donor base because it's largely people with whom we've created a relationship. It's rather like consulting. You don't get a consulting project until you've had 6 meetings. You don't get a donor relationship until you've had 6 meetings. But once you have it, particularly if the donor has made the journey to Lebanon and met the children and been Shatila, they pivot and they stay with us. We're in a very fortunate position of stability and the very unfortunate position of not being able to grow fast. Because if you depend on just relationships, then you're going to create those relationships one by one, and each one takes 6 months before anything good happens. And that's true of, and one of our other kind of idiosyncrasies is we never ask for money. I mean, people give money at the moment that they want to once the relationship has been established. And then they give perhaps best of all, not just money, but also time. They come and teach or run a workshop with us. Alsama becomes part of their lives and a very fulfilling part. So that's the way that it works. We are acutely aware that we are not well enough known, particularly in America. If America is the home of philanthropy, then that is the place that will ultimately fund Alsama as it begins to multiply across the Middle East as we speak.
So how can people donate, or where do people go if they want to donate?
If they just want to donate, then the easy thing to do would be to go to the website www.alsamaproject.com. There's a donate button and you donate. And it's money very well spent because we have practically no overheads.
Are you a non-profit? Meaning, will people get that off their taxes?
Indeed. Okay. So we are a non-profit, and we have established in the US as well as in Britain as well as in Lebanon. Very tax efficient.
Yes.
I mean, if you're wanting to give more than just a few dollars, then you should contact me. They contact me via contacting you, or just then there are emails on the website, and then we should talk. And it'll be a very unpressurized conversation because, as I say, I mean, what we want most, first and foremost, is for people to engage with us, because then and only then do good things happen. I mean, the transactional, I didn't feel particularly satisfied just giving money, but the combination of money and experience and relationships all together is very fulfilling.
Yes, that's the best use of money. I mean, I have a lot of complaints about money and its usage in the world, but there is also a lot to be said for it. And this is one of the best reasons for money. Money beyond one's needs. Yeah.
And so many of us have money beyond one's needs. And then we start thinking about spending it unwisely or giving it an inheritance where it will unlikely do much good.
I know. I have this pet theory. My idea is that beyond a certain amount per child or per heir, per spouse, children, and what that amount is debatable, but in the millions. Beyond that amount, a person's wealth should die with the person. You can spend as much money as you want in your life, you can make as much money as you want, you can give away as much money as you want, you can definitely take care of your family, your children, whoever, as much as you want, but then there is a limit to how much you pass on. And after those many millions, when you're done, so is the rest of the money, and it can go back to the kitty. Hopefully the non-profit kitty rather than the government coffers, because who wants the government to manage that money? But the idea being that if we even begin to pretend to be a democracy or an egalitarian society, well, we can't achieve that. We can't have a vote that is in any way equivalent. We can't have a meritocracy if some of us are born with hundreds of millions and others with nothing or in debt. Without taking away one's advantages, birthright advantages, even out the field a little bit would be wonderful. And you still have all the motivations to earn money, to invent things, to, whatever, do everything you want in your lifetime, show what you can do and earn the max and enjoy it to the max.
And I don't think that money is a birthright advantage. In fact, I think Edgar Allan Poe said that if you are born with money, it's like a stillbirth.
Interesting.
Yeah, you want to achieve things on the basis of your own talents and own activity. Yeah. You don't want to be given an unfair advantage, because then you can never totally be proud of yourself. What does that mean then for people of our age? Well, it produces this delightful obligation. What it means for for people like ourselves is that we have this delightful obligation, I think, to spend our money before we die. And in fact, really, to give it away. Every last penny of it, and you've got to get the timing right. You don't want to be bankrupt before. Yeah. And you probably do want to hand over a little bit to children.
Right. Yes.
In between now and death, you're going to help your children as much as you can, and they will appreciate it now much more than after your death.
That's right.
And there is still leftover. Yeah. And that leftover can make this particular period an extraordinarily rich period, because money spent wisely really can do a lot of good. And of course, you'd expect me to say that, but I think education is in some ways the ultimate way of spending money because of its radiating effect for so long in a person's life, and it affects so many people around that person.
That's right. Yeah, I think so too. And we have certainly given our children those advantages from the day they were born. For those who are always arguing, well, what about my kids? Our kids have actually profited from the well-being in the West from the beginning, whereas the children that you're educating a little belatedly have not. So that's partly what we're trying to even out. And I do believe strongly that this is for the best of all, that having a humanity that is more balanced is for the best of all, for the longevity of the species at large. I don't think that there is any chance, even 1%, that the children of the 1% will survive and the rest will not. If you look at history, the odds are that the children of the 1% will perish sooner than the children of the 99% because they have the skills of survival. Creating a world where there is mutual empathy and support and love rather than envy, resentment, inherited hatred, misunderstanding, bias, and all of that is for the best of everyone. Our own children first, and the children of the rest of the world as well. There is a little bit of self-serving interest, I think, there.
Massive self-serving, but the self here is a higher self.
That's well said, Richard. Yes, thank you. We'll wrap it up, but I do want to say that I'm very interested in looking at your teaching. Is that on your website?
Yes, it is.
Curriculum.
We've developed our own curriculum. The core of the curriculum is English, Arabic, and Maths, but around it we build a number of other things like critical thinking, like a whole range of extracurricular stuff like yoga and music and the like. What's intriguing about curriculum curriculum is firstly that we don't use textbooks. We teach by our objective. So we teach orally, but the teacher is told, is not given a textbook, because that crutch will then mean that we create too easily rote learning, and then we can't easily move fast enough. So what we say is that this class, by the end of this month, needs to have achieved these objectives. Then we work with the teachers in order to deliver those objectives, and we measure those objectives. So that gives the teachers quite a lot of freedom in how to get there, no freedom at all about the destination. Another thing that's quite remarkable is that we try very hard to make all of these classes relevant to the children's own lives. So we have, for example, something that's called common theme-based learning, which means that we create a project which absorbs the Arabic, the English, and the maths. So one of these projects might be the creation of the family budget. So that's obviously got a maths element, but it can be discussed in Arabic, it can be discussed in English. Put it all together, make it into a project, and suddenly you have equipped a child to solve one of the primary problems that these families have, which is if you're not numerate, then it's very hard to sustain yourself over a period of time when the money coming in is quite irregular as well.
What is another example? That's a great example because it's specific. What's another example of an objective? So at the end of the 6 months, the children have to achieve...
In the end of the 6 months, the children have to be able to read and write Arabic, recognize all the numbers, add and take away numbers, and the best of them will be able to divide numbers as well. So that's essentially the definition of numeracy at that point. And they will probably be able to read an English word. They may not be able to understand it, but that will come later, but it comes fast later.
Mm-hmm. And what's the situation with Wi-Fi?
Wi-Fi is decent. We do Zoom calls from Shatila, we do Zoom calls from Bourj, al-Barajneh, and it's a lifesaver. It means that, for example, there are schools, good schools in Britain at the moment, that mentor our children. So teenagers talking to teenagers, two very different worlds coming together, and that goes swimmingly well.
Amazing. Well, you've done an extraordinary amount of labor in the past 4 years. It's just unbelievable. Thank you for sharing so much with me and us today. And everyone out there, look up Alsama Project. And until next week, keep speaking up, keep spreading the word, and keep spreading the love.